I got a history with our next speaker. He once announced he was running for president at an event that I held. He occasionally is known to call me at home on the weekend, either yelling at me for pictures of cooking I've put on Instagram or demanding the recipes for the things I have put on Instagram. I mentioned this before, that it's nice to know that people who, in the rarefied era of statewide elected office, cabinet secretaries and whatnot, are actually normal people, some of whom would much prefer to actually be back in Texas than having to go to Washington, D.C., but feels called to do that, to help the country, to help the president, to do a good job. And I got to tell you, in having talked to him since he became the Secretary of Energy, to find out that the Secretary of Energy does a whole lot more than just deal with energy issues. And so it's a delight to be able to talk to him about that. He and his wife are just good friends and prayer warriors for my family. Love the man dearly. He is the former governor of the state of Texas, the Secretary of Energy, Rick Perry.
How you doing, brother? Good to see you. And you? Well. Awesome. It's good to be home.
So, I was about to say.
Actually, it's good to be close to home. Round Top being real home. So anyway, there's just something about every time my body passes through the plane of the border of Texas when I come back, it is, you all know how fortunate you are to live in the greatest state in the nation. And
I need to tell you that someone who works for me got here the other day and said it was overrated, and I had to disabuse him of the notion.
Really? What's overrated, Texas or?
Texas, yeah, that's what he thought. We had to disabuse him of the notion.
Okay.
He's from Montana, though. He can't help it. Too close to Canada.
Competition is a good thing. So, and I get to represent 50 states in my job, but I'm sorry, I don't make any apologies about being a Texan or a Texas Aggie.
There you go.
Sorry.
So now that you're Secretary of Energy, your job is a whole lot more than I ever expected, and I know from talking to you that you got a lot of responsibilities as Secretary of Energy.
Yeah, it's one of the, God's got a plan. Sometimes it's not your plan, right, Chip? I'll tell you this great story. This is like a year ago. We're in the Oval Office, and I'll tell you how long ago it was. It was myself, Ryan Zinke. Priebus was still the chief of staff, so it was better than a year ago. Mm-hmm. And Tom Price was in there as well. There was a little lighthearted banter going along and around. And the president looked over at me and he said, "Perry, you wanted this job once upon a time." I said, "Mr. President, you are absolutely correct, but knowing what I know now, I'm sure glad you have it." So, and the reason I share that is because God does have a plan. And the idea that I really thought that, I was supposed to be the President of the United States, well, that's what I thought. But where he has placed me, and doing the work that I get to do as the Secretary of Energy is the right place for me. It's the right place to serve this country. It's the right place to serve this president. And he's got a couple of other governors, Nikki at her job as the ambassador to UN, and then Governor Sonny Perdue, former Georgia governor, who's over at the Ag Department. So he's got some governors sitting on that cabinet as well, doing fabulous jobs. But we're really about, and Zinke was a congressman, but Zinke was a congressman for a pretty short period of time. So really when you think about it, I'm really the only long-tenured political type person on his cabinet. The bulk of these are, like Wilbur Ross and Steve Mnuchin, people who have extraordinary private sector histories and really bring some fascinating expertise to the cabinet. But Back to Erick's observation about the Department of Energy. You know, in its name, it basically gives you, it's about fossil fuels, it's about LNG, it's about nuclear power, it's about coal, it's about the renewables, it's about hydro. But that's a really small part of the portfolio. Like 2/3 of the budget of the Department of Energy deals with nuclear weapons. It's the repository of all the nuclear weapons in this country. We've been tasked with modernizing that arsenal with Congress. There's a new nuclear posture review. There's just a lot going on in that arena. So the Nuclear National Security Agency, NNSA, is over in the department as well. The secretary is on the National Security Council, so you're wired into a lot of classified briefings about a lot of different things going on in the world. If we are successful with North Korea, as we all hope we are, the Department of Energy will be a very, very important verifier. And if this goes the way the president wants it to go, we'll have a lot of our employees in North Korea doing the dismantling, disposing of these weapons. So the department is very involved with that. Obviously, Iran and the JICPOA, the intel, all of that with Iran, the department is dealing with that as well. So, and all of that is not even the coolest part. So the coolest part of being, and I tell people the best job I ever had in my life, being the governor of the state of Texas. Nothing else even close, and never will be. The coolest job I've ever had is this one. And the reason, all these other things are interesting, but there are 17 national labs scattered out all across the country. Everything from the 3 nuclear labs, Sandia, Los Alamos, the work that's done at the Pacific Northwest Lab, Idaho National Lab, Princeton Plasma Lab, the Lawrence Livermore out at Berkeley, and I mean just these fascinating national labs that are involved in a host of issues across the board. Everything from working on renewables to 5 of the 10 fastest supercomputers in the world belong to the Department of Energy. As a matter of fact, 6 weeks ago we announced the Summit computer at Oak Ridge National Lab, Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Fastest, most sophisticated supercomputer in the world. Now belongs to the United States again, operated by the Department of Energy. Those computers and the speed of which they work give us the potential to answer questions that have vexed mankind for a long time. And I'll give you one example here, Eric, of the things that we work on that you're like, why is DOE involved with that? And it's with health care, and it's with medical care, and it's with veterans' health. All of you that know me from my time as governor know I got a real passion about veterans, and particularly veterans' health. And frankly, from my perspective, over the last decade, the country has failed to deliver health care to the veterans. And these are young men and women that held their hand up and said, we promised to uphold the Constitution, laws of the country, and defend this country, and we're going to do that. And if something happens to us, you're going to take care of us. That was our deal. And we failed as a country to do that in all too many ways. And one of those is in veterans' mental health. We got a huge number of veterans that commit suicide every day. I think the number's still north of 20 a day. And the department, I decided we were going to try to address this. And the way we found to be able to do it is through these supercomputers, and to be able to allow, in this case, University of California, San Francisco has a neurosciences department that is world class. We partnered up with them. They're using our supercomputers, and they're coming up with answers on mental health that you just couldn't get. I mean, literally a few years ago, the head of this department basically said, "You've been able to give us answers to things." He said we've made more progress in the last 6 weeks than we have in the last 10 years because of these supercomputers and their speed of which they can put the data in and then get an answer. One last example I will give you, and then I'm going to shut up. And man, you turn me loose in here.
That's fine.
This guy's name is Jeffrey Manley, and he's a neurosurgeon that works at UC San Francisco. He's developed a technology, literally about a 1-inch square little chip, if you will, 1 drop of blood from an accident victim. And they can slide that into a small, about the size of an iPad, a machine that analyzes it. And in 10 minutes, that machine can tell you whether or not the victim has been concussed. Now, what that does is it completely changes their lives, particularly if it's let's say it's an automobile accident, or it's it's your daughter who's been concussed at a soccer match. In the ambulance taking them to the hospital, they can run that test and make sure they take them to the right hospital. Because if you take them to the wrong hospital, it doesn't have the ability to know how to deal, because you can MRI and you can do all these different things that we have, but it won't tell you what you really need to know about a concussion and traumatic brain injury. This can. And it came from this type of work that we're doing at the department. I mean, I told people, I said, that is the type of evidence that people want when they see their tax money being spent and this is the result they're getting. They're going, okay, you keep doing that. We're for that. So that's the exciting things that we're doing at DOE. I mean, it's just the most fascinating, coolest thing I've ever gotten to do in my life. So anyway, I'm still very, very glad that the president asked me to serve. I'm glad that my darling wife said yes. It's okay.
So how is your wife?
She's great. She follows you. She lives her life vicariously through your Instagram account. You know that.
Yeah,
I mean, seriously,
I know.
man. She's like, oh, look, here's what Erick's eating tonight. Let's try that tomorrow. Seriously. Some of that stuff is pretty good.
I've gotten the recipe request,
Yeah,
so
I know.
Yep,
Yep.
I'm set up to deliver.
Yeah.
So let me ask you one of the other things that the Department of Energy is having to deal with now is, in addition to the power grid, we've got the story about the nefarious hackers trying to get in, cybersecurity issues, and you're having to deal with all this stuff.
Cybersecurity, the Department of Energy is the sector-specific agency to deal with the electrical grid and the protection of the electrical grid, the defense of the electrical grid. So we have a very robust team, mostly in our national labs. We actually, at Nevada, outside of Idaho Falls, not Nevada, excuse me, Idaho, outside of Idaho Falls, the Idaho National Lab, the department actually owns its own grid. So we can go break things. We can go infest this grid with viruses and different types of nefarious types of things that we either see out there. The number of attacks on electrical power control panels is stunning. I mean, in the millions a day, these things get pinged by, it may be everything from a nation state who does not have our best interest in mind to a terrorist group to, some
8-year-old
young man sitting in his mom's basement.
Wow.
pinging away, seeing what he can find out at, the Western Power Administration. I mean, it's just, and so it's of great concern. I mean, many of you saw, I think, last weekend or the weekend before, that Russia had, it was recognized that Russia was the culprit, if you will, who had gotten into an electric power grid or electric control panel up in the Northeast. And so, we know the Iranians were the ones that got into Aramco, into Saudi Arabia's control panels. The Russians do this. I mean, it's when the New York Times says they're more concerned about the Russians affecting our electric grid than they are our elections, then maybe we're paying attention to the right place here.
For as much good as has come from interconnectivity around the world, you do have these new malevolent ways that we can get in, and we're not dealing with tanks across a battlefield anymore. We're dealing with some kid in a foreign country on a computer.
Yeah. So here's, and this is new. 5 years ago, we would not have been having this
would have
conversation.
been a Tom Clancy novel.
And absolutely. And here's a scenario that I want to lay out for you that is real, and it's one. My role's changed. When I wore my hat that I was the governor of the state of Texas, I was substantially more economically focused on the things that affect the state, and I think rightly so. But I did, Texas has ERCOT. 85% of the state is in this grid that the Electrical Reliability Council of Texas is what it is. It's a private sector operated, but works very closely with the Public Utility Commission, and we're not attached to the federal grid. It's another one of those things that we're rather proud of.
I've gotten several questions from people about that.
But the point is, I had the conversation about them, but it was more about make sure that your economics work so that you have the plants to be able to keep. And this is in 07, 08, and I think we might have had a little bit of a hot summer, and we really stressed the system. And I called them in the following spring, and I said, boys, let's just make sure we do have the power, and that you're really, we got the reserves, so that if we do get into this very, very cold, very, very hot summer, that we can handle it. Today, my role is different. And my role is different partly because, I'll make this statement, you don't know what you don't know, okay? What I didn't know as the governor of Texas was that because of the classified briefings that the Secretary of Energy gets today, and the real challenges that we have from these bad actors around the world that would use cyber to affect us. That's one part of the challenge. You've got this new, because of the interconnectivity, these computers that are incredibly fast that folks have access to. And then we've been blessed in this country with the ability, because of innovation and technology, to produce copious amounts of gas that 10 years ago we had no idea we could produce. I mean, there was a guy giving a speech 12 years ago, peak oil, remember that speech? I mean, we'd found it all. Even if we find any more, it's going to be too expensive to produce. So, I mean, it is what it is, and we found all of these fossil fuels that we can use. Well, nobody told George Mitchell that. And so hydraulic fracturing, directional drilling, which, by the way, directional drilling, one of the reasons it was successful is because they were working with a national lab that came up with an adhesive that allowed the polycarbonate crystalline particles to stay on the drill bit. So the national labs had a role to play in the directional drilling. But we've completely changed the energy balance in the world. The United States is the #1 oil and gas producing country in the world. I mean, this is stunning. A decade ago, we were still reliant upon countries that didn't have, Venezuela, the Middle East, some countries over there that really didn't have our interest in mind. Today, the geopolitics in the world has been turned on its head because the United States can deliver LNG anywhere in the world competitively. Our European friends, with the exception of the Germans, who've got their own, they're doing their own deal with the Russians over there, and everybody's figured that out in the European Union. They do not want Nord Stream 1. They understand that the Russians might not be in their best interest to hold their energy future. The Germans want to just be they're looking at a short term, we'll wheel all the power and y'all can come to us. And anyway, the president's right in clearly stating we don't want Nord Stream 1. It's not a commercially viable thing. It's all about politics and geopolitics of the European Union. So this energy scenario that we find ourselves in now, we're incredibly blessed to have all this gas. But here's what you need to keep in mind. We've had almost 100,000 megawatts of power, nuclear power, taken offline. Take it back. Nuclear and coal taken offline in the last 10 years and replaced by gas. Economics being what it is. Now, I will argue that one of the reasons that those plants became uneconomical, nuclear and coal, was because of government policies and an administration that hated coal and did everything they could to destroy the coal industry and really disliked nuclear as well. Mm-hmm. And so the point is, all of that's been taken off, and the projections are over the next couple of years almost the same amount again. And when you think about a megawatt of electricity powers 1,000 homes, there's nearly 12 million homes that have been changed over to gas. Now, everything works right, not a problem, right? You lose a pipeline because of either physical attack or a cyber attack. And that single pipeline now serves substantially more generation. So my concern is, before we just go harem-scarum, gas is the cheapest form of energy. My question is, what's the most resilient, reliable form of energy? Nobody in the country put more work into wind energy than we did here in the state of Texas during the time I was governor. We produce more wind energy in Texas today than all but 5 countries. I said 5 other countries one day, and I got in trouble for
It is like a whole other country.
It was just a Freudian slip. But anyway, the point is, that wind and solar are interruptible, and so is gas pipelines. The only 2 forms of energy that are not interruptible are coal and nuclear, because they've got that fuel on site. So the president said, look, Perry, I want you to make sure that the resiliency and the reliability of the grid is there. And to do that, we really had to take a look at the national security aspect of our national grid and how we get that power. If there wasn't people out there that want to do bad things and do cyber attacks, you think about the Northeast. I think last winter had one of those polar vortexes came down. And again, this is some politics of New York State won't let gas pipelines be built across their state, and so they're limited up there in the amount of gas that they can get in, or the amount of power that they can get in, and they had a really stressful cold snap. They literally had Russian molecules of LNG in Boston Harbor. A whole new Boston Tea Party coming. But the point is, the politics of energy can really get can get challenging. So my job is not just economics anymore. It's to make sure that people don't have to make a decision between keeping my family warm or keeping the lights on. When New York City, the financial center of this, of the world, has the potential to be shut down because of a restriction of the fuel sources into that part of the world, 99% of the military bases in the continental United States are connected to the civilian grid. So there's a real national security aspect to this that 5 years ago we probably would not have been having this conversation, but it's very real today. So the President's instructions to find the ways to make sure that we have a resilient source of energy in this country that can't be interrupted is what's driving this whole debate about coal. And if somebody wants to just debate it on the economics, that's fine. I don't have that luxury because of classified information that I know that we have to deal with. And if New York City turns into a jungle because the lights go out, I know where the buck stops.
Well, in that regard, we had a number of people who submitted questions for you, and almost all of them were nuclear energy, the burdens.
Yeah.
Jared is sitting over there. What are the regulatory barriers to creating new nuclear power plants? And it seems like the left really is hostile to
They are, and
nuclear.
it's this great dichotomy. It's zero emissions. On the one hand, it's like, global warming, what are you doing on climate change? And, wind and solar is good. And I agree, wind and solar is good, but wind and solar can't replace. In 2040, 70% of the energy produced in the world is still going to be fossil fuels. I mean, there's a billion people in Africa who still don't have electricity. None. I mean, and I just think that it's rather morally reprehensible from my perspective for somebody on the left coast of the United States to say, well, we're not, we're gonna go wind and solar, and fossil fuel's bad. And I'm like, and you're basically going to tell those people you're going to live in poverty, you're going to die early, and your kids aren't being educated because you've decided you're going to pick and choose which fuel to use. Here's the real answer from my perspective. We have the ability to have a resurgent civil nuclear energy program in this country. And it'll be driven by our national labs and working in conjunction with the private sector. Westinghouse is still the best reactor manufacturer in the world. And yeah, they had some problems economically, but we're looking at small modular reactors to get into specifics here. NuScale is a company that is working with our Idaho National Lab, and they're substantially smaller, substantially easier to build, don't have all of the massive infrastructure. My bet is we're through building these really big, massive nuclear plants, partly just because we regulated them into oblivion. And look at the French build them every 120 kilometers, little cracker box plants, and of course they're wanting to move away from those because nuclear is bad, but it's zero emissions. So I'm kind of like. So my first outing representing the United States was in April of 2017. It was to go to Rome to represent us in the G7. the United States and like France and Italy, Japan, the G7. And this was like before the president had made the decision that we were not going to participate in this Paris Agreement. And so they were yeah, really. So they're in public, we're in there, and they're, really lecturing me about, the United States can't get out of the Paris Agreement. There's 100 and something countries that have all agreed on this. And I'm kind of like, yes, sir, I understand. And then we would go into our private bilats, and I'm not talking out of school here. You just need to know this. They're like, one of the first things they ask, kind of like, how can we buy some of that LNG y'all got? I'm kind of like, wait a minute. So they recognize, and rightfully so, they're recognizing if you want to address your climate, and we're talking about the emissions, go to LNG. It's one of the fastest ways to address the emissions issue is to go to cleaner burning LNG. We did it right here in the 12th largest economy in the world, Eric. During the period of time I was governor, we had this massive shift over from older, inefficient plants to cleaner burning LNG plants. Now, we had that big wind energy thing, but that was the real driver was our switch over to natural gas. We had reductions of over 60% of nitrogen oxide, over 50% of sulfur dioxide, and had almost a 20% reduction of carbon dioxide. At the same time, we led the nation in job creation. I always tell these guys, I say, we had like 7 million people added to the population rolls in Texas during that period of time, like between 2003 and 2013. 7 million people. I said, you know what that means? And now they look at you, and I go, that's a lot of pickup trucks. Because you think about it, I mean, these kids were, either getting out of community college or getting out of high school, graduating. They go buy them a pickup truck, and because they got the money, they're making, good money. We got jobs going here. We led the nation in job creation and all that. So, I mean, and so your conventional wisdom says, man, the non-point source pollution just went up like crazy with all these pickup trucks out there, right? But the fact is that we addressed our emissions, and we addressed our emissions by doing a number of things, but the least of which was not natural gas. So the LNG opportunity that we saw the president with the European president, I think 2 weeks ago, selling a lot of LNG. One of my jobs is to be the best LNG salesman in the world, and me, I take that job seriously. So whether it's I've been to India, and India, Japan, China, all of those countries are going to be, and the European Union, Poland got a major facility built there to import LNG into there. Coming in, the Romanians, we're talking to the Romanians about the potential of building a plant there. There's another pipeline coming from the Caspian Sea, which is Azerbaijani gas, down the southern part of Turkey, up in through Italy to supply. And those we're really supportive of those because they're alternatives to Russian gas. And so it's just really fascinating. But back to the nuclear, the Saudi Arabians recognize that by 2040 their supplies of fossil fuels are really going to decline. They want to build 16 nuclear plants because they recognize that 20 years down the road, their position as being number one crude producer is going to be not there. But they also recognize that if they can build these plants now, they don't have to use their crude to produce energy, that they can sell it on the market, and the market's going to stay there. So great potential. We need to be their partners. We need to be their partners for a lot of reasons, the least of which is not they're the most vibrant economy in that part of the world that's going to build these plants. And they want to be our partner. The challenge is with the non-proliferation that we require. And anyway, I don't want to get into all that. They live in kind of a not necessarily nicest neighborhood. And the Iranians, with what they've got going on, it's one of the reasons the president stepped away from the JCPOA is, they're not honest brokers. And I'm being kind.
Governor, all
Bless you.
the politicians that we've had sitting up on stage who are running for office, I've asked them what we can do for them. How can we pray for you?
Yeah. Actually, not necessarily for me, for the country, for the president. We, I know, I guess I don't think my prayers are boring to the Lord, but I know that they're boring to my wife. She reminds me from time to time, because I do pray for my family and for their safety and well-being, but to pray for our young men and women who still in a lot of places around the world are in harm's way. Pray for this president, being the onslaught that goes after him, the forces of evil that array against him. It's stunning. And let me tell you, he is a happy warrior. I mean, we talked about Ronald Reagan being a happy warrior. Ronald Reagan ain't got nothing on Donald Trump. This guy, I mean, it is fascinating, his stamina. I mean, you watch him on TV, he is amazing. And somebody was asking us about, said, what's a cabinet meeting like? And I said, well, never boring. I said, never boring. But he is a really good manager. I mean, he knows exactly where he wants to go. He does not suffer fools well, and he really does not suffer the bureaucracy. And
good.
Yeah. I mean, he's like, get stuff done and get stuff done right now. And but to pray for the president, pray for his health, pray for his protection, and pray for his wisdom. And that would be my request of you as you kneel down at night and make your desires known to the Almighty.
Governor Perry, Secretary Perry, thank you very much for joining us.
Eric, it's good to be with you. God bless you all. Thank you. Love you.
Thank you.
It was good.
Tell your wife I said hi.
I will. I'll do it. Promise.